What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Let's Talk About It podcast, where we turn conversation into application. Today is a very special episode. Today is my very own Q&A live podcast episode. And I've been talking about this for weeks, and I'm super excited that it's here now. But before I get into that, I want to definitely thank JG and the whole Audio Wave Network crew. I want to thank all my subscribers, followers, people who repost my stuff, share it, hit me up in the DM or text me, call me, say, appreciate you, man, for the content you're putting out and the podcast and all of that. So I appreciate y'all for supporting me. Appreciate y'all for tapping in with the podcast, reposting it, just listening to it. So before we get into the podcast, I just want to, thank y'all real quick. And with that being said, we're going to get into it, man. Live podcast, we here. Got to put this in the comments real quick. So I'm going to start off with this first question. My boy Juan hit me up on TikTok. I got some questions that were submitted to me like before the Q&A episode. And the first one says, what would society be like if you were in charge? Now, if I was in charge, it'd be a lot of stuff that would change for sure. But if I was in charge, that's definitely a tough one. But I think that, I would, find a way to like end homelessness some way, somehow. Like, build a like center, like multiple centers around the, city that I live in, which is Detroit or wherever I resided. I would, build like just different centers so that people could stay there, and if some way possible they wouldn't have to like pay no rent or something like that. We would, pay for everything, meals, food, different stuff, so they wouldn't have to, worry about expenses because, it's already a burden being homeless. So that's one of the things that I would change, try to end homelessness some way, somehow by building centers around, different parts of Detroit or wherever, I would reside. Another thing that I would do, it's kind of tough because I think at different schools it's different for different kids. So I was going to say like free lunch for kids, but I think they already do that. But that's what comes to my mind right off the bat. As far as like if I was in charge, what, would I do? Another thing, he actually proposed a question to me, like he gave an example, because when he first told me the question, I didn't really understand it when he said like, what would you do if you were in charge of like society or whatever? But, I feel like another thing I would do, because you start pretty young, like when you work around, like I think the youngest you could work is like 13. I know you can only work a certain amount of hours as like a 12 or 13-year-old, but I would kind of, give more hours to the younger kids just because, you want to, make as much money as possible. So that's another thing. But that's all I got for that question, to be honest with you. But the second question, I really like this one. It says, what is one of the biggest lessons God has taught you this year so far? Or I messed that up. What is one of the biggest lessons God has taught you thus far in life? I would say two big things. One, be okay with new beginnings. A lot of times, like we do certain things for so long, we around certain people for so long, we live our life a certain way for so long. So it's something that like a guy that's like a big brother to me said. He said, we got to ask ourselves, is this something negative or is this something new? Like, is what I'm doing or like what I'm going through, is it negative and is it not good for me, or is it just something new that's challenging me? So like a lot of times, I guess for me, like things have been a certain way for so long, you kind of get comfortable like, oh, this is supposed to be like this, but God has shown me, the last few years that, especially this year for sure, like you got to embrace new beginnings and you can't be upset. I saw a quote the other day that said, a lot of old things ending and a lot of new things are beginning. And to be honest, I'm grateful for it all. That's one of the things that God has shown me thus far in my life. Don't be afraid of new beginnings, man. I'm in my Damian Lillard era, you feel me? Been in a place for so long. And, when it's time, when it's, everybody's saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that. But, when it's time for the new beginnings, it's time to move on. You know what I mean? So I'm in my Damian Lillard, you know, Bobby Brown era, minus the crack, of course, but more so Damian Lillard era, you feel me? So new beginnings. That's one thing that God has taught me thus far. And another thing is like control what you can control. And I know we say that all the time and you hear that a lot throughout life, whether it's from your parents, mentors, all of that. You feel what I'm saying? But I really, truly believe that, I can only control what I can control. So, and I was just thinking, on my way over here, like, people gonna say what they want about you. People gonna talk about you. They gonna praise you one minute. They gonna knock you the next. But you can't control what people say, but you can control how you handle yourself, how you treat others, you feel me? So, and at the end of the day, I look at it like this. Like, let's say, for instance, somebody like, oh, Leon, terrible. Like, Lee is horrible. Like, I may have been a few months ago. You feel what I'm saying? Like, I'll never knock something that is a fact. You feel me? Because I'm not a perfect individual. I don't try to live my life like I am. I just try to do the best with what I got and what I, learn it as I journey throughout my life. So maybe in 2015, I was horrible. I was selfish. Maybe in 2017, I didn't know how to communicate. But all I would say for when it comes to controlling what you can control in regards to people and what they say about you and how they feel and what they tell others about you. You know what I'm saying? All I would tell people, if you're going to talk about me, just speak facts. You know what I'm saying? Or if you're going to talk about an individual, just make sure that, it's factual what you're saying. I can't go off like how I dealt with a person in 2016 and I don't really rock with them in 2023. And what I mean by that is like a lot of people have like distant memories of you of how you were in 2017 that they can't let go, or whatever year it was. Like a lot of people can't let go of the past you. So it's like, even in 2023, going into 2024, you still, in their minds, you're still this type of person because they're not connected to you no more. So it's like, I try my best not to go around for people I'm not connected to, or for whatever reason, like if it ended bad or if it ended whatever way, you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to speak on somebody I really don't know no more, because people go through changes, and people may not be the same people they were from a few years ago, a few months ago. So just learning to control what you can control, because a lot of people try to control your narrative. And at the end of the day, I know who I am. I know what type of guy I am. So it's like people will always bring up what you didn't do, or like, oh, and me and my girl was just talking about it like last weekend. When you start speaking up and when you set boundaries, people get offended and they get in their feelings. So at the end of the day, that let me know who I'm working with. And that leads me to another thing that I learned from God, like uncomfortable conversations, different situations that happen. You kind of get to see who people really are. You know what I'm saying? So when you go through stuff, when you had disagreements, I believe, and I learned this from my pops. I'm always shouting out my pops for real. But like I learned from my dad, like when you have uncomfortable conversations or like a person you really rock heavy with, you got a tight knit bond and y'all have a disagreement or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You kind of get to see how people really view you or what their standpoint is on the situation at hand. So that's another thing too, aside from, controlling what I can control and being grateful and acknowledging and accepting new beginnings, is understanding like when situations happen, you learn who people are. So it's like, and I'm not going to sit here and say like I didn't handle every situation perfectly, because I know I haven't. But like just speaking from my experience with people or just things in general, just you kind of get to see like if, hey man, I want to do this, or like, no, I don't really agree with that, or like I felt this way about such and such, you know what I'm saying? And you get to see who you dealing with. So, I really been paying attention to that for the last few months, for real, because it's helped me a great deal for sure. So, those three things for sure. If I had to pick a top 3 or top 5 list, those would be it. for sure. Just understanding that new beginnings are cool or okay. You don't have to be afraid of it. You don't have to stay comfortable in what has always been. It's like, oh, I don't want to leave what's going on in my life because this is how it's always been. We like kind of give life a default, like, oh, this is how my life's supposed to be the whole time from when I'm born until when I die. And they don't necessarily have to be like that. So I'm embracing the new beginnings, man. And new beginnings in terms of like something positive, something that God want me to go towards and, things that, I have to leave behind. And just also controlling what I can control. I can't control what people say, how people view me, but I can control like who I am, how I conduct myself, how I treat people. And then lastly, just seeing when you have a disagreement with somebody or when you bring something up or when you set boundaries. And it's so weird like how when you set boundaries, like you kind of really see who really for you. You know what I'm saying? Like when you say, no, I'm not doing this no more, or like I'm not hanging out no more, or I want to do this instead of this. And you kind of get to see who really in your corner and who really rock with you or like, what you up against. So those are the three things for sure that God has taught me thus far in my life. I appreciate the questions. My boy Noah said, what does it take to get a podcast up and running for myself? For me, you kind of answered it yourself. Like you got stuff that I was telling somebody this the other day, like you got stuff that you are adamant about. You got stuff that you are knowledgeable on, you know what I'm saying? And you got to look up the facts. You got to do your homework and you got stuff that you can really spread awareness about. And so for me, just like quick story, it may not be quick. I ain't even gonna lie to you. It might be long, but, like, when I was in college, my senior year, I was like, well, really it started during the pandemic. And I was watching this podcast called All the Smoke with two former NBA players, Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes. And so I was like, man, they bringing everybody on there. They bringing current NBA players like KD, Curry, former NBA players like Allen Iverson, you know what I'm saying? All these different guys. And they was bringing celebrities on, movie stars, artists, like, and it was dope just to how they can sit back in a chill room and just be themselves, have like conversations that they may not be able to bring to ESPN for whatever reason. And I was like, man, that's dope. And I had always knew podcasts were out, but I had got heavy into it my junior and senior year. So my senior year, I hit a couple friends up at the time and was like, yo, we talk about a lot of stuff in this group chat that we in or that we had at the time. And I'm like, man, we should start a podcast. You feel me? And they was like, nah, for real. And I was like, y'all with it? And then we had a podcast, but, shortly after it was canceled or whatever. But me, I still had the, motivation to get the messages out that I felt adamant about and the topics that I wanted to talk about. And I felt like were being put on the back burner. So I just went ahead and did my own podcast. In 2021, like I believe it was in August. So I can't remember the date right off the bat. But yeah, man, I knew I had a message to say. And people who know me know I like to indulge in conversation, like, healthy conversation or just conversation in general. So I'm like, what better way to do that than to create your own platform and be positive and uplifting and talk about different stuff that people may not have knowledge on or may just want answers about. And don't get it twisted. Like when I come on here, I don't always have the answers. That's why you see me with guests. That's why you see me bringing in people in certain professions because they've been through it and they can teach me as well as people that's viewing. So I say that to say, man, just find some stuff that appeal to the people that you want to talk to. And, for me, my process is like every day, like every time I get an idea, like I'll write it in my little book. Like I got like 3-4 books that I write different ideas for my podcast in. Like when I think of a topic, I at least have 3 people that I know would be good for a topic. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna reach out to all 3 of them, and whoever reach out, I'm gonna reach out to them, and we're gonna do it this way. You know what I'm saying? So I would just say find your target audience, find the stuff that you want to talk about it, that you feel like, and it don't necessarily even have to be like, oh, people don't know this. Like maybe they already do know it and you just want to deliver it in a different way that may be appealing and like applicable to people in your target audience. So I would just say, the ideas that you want to convey and you want to put into action, start there and then just move forward with that. That's what I would say for sure. Like, because I mean, everybody got something they want to talk about. So, I mean, that's all I would say, you know, craft those ideas. Like I said, every day I'm in my notebook, like, okay, I'm gonna reach out to this person because I see what they doing. Like, cause I watch people like entrepreneurs or like athletes or like people that I just hold in high regard. I'm like, man, I've had a conversation with this person before. I feel like they would be good on this topic, or like I see what they doing in their career field and I want to get them on the podcast. Even if I don't really have a solid relationship with you, even if I just know you from somebody else, like if I rock with what you're doing, I'm gonna hit you up. Like, I'm not gonna be afraid to be like, yo, I see what you're doing. And it done been times where I done looked at like people that I follow that I'm like real cool with or like tight with, and they done reposted their friend and they got a good business that I'm like, oh, that's dope. Or they done said like a one-liner that was like caught my attention. I'm like, oh, let me get them on the podcast. And I don't really know them like that. And then the relationship is formed because like I had them on a podcast and then stuff like that. But I would just say, you know, just find your target audience, find the stuff that you want to talk about, and then go from there for real, for real. But yeah, man, that's what I do. I plan out topics, or like it have been times where I've been on FaceTime with my friends, FaceTime with my girl, or I've been talking to my pops or whoever, or like somebody has said something like that's like, dang, I didn't really think about it like that. And then that's a podcast idea for me. And then I start that day reaching out to the people that I want to reach out to. So that's what I would say, man, for sure. But yeah, man, that's what I would say. Just find the stuff that you want to talk about. If you want somebody to be a co-host, find that, you know. I was talking to my cousin about it, and I got to give a big shout out to my cousin, Davon, for sure, because he's another reason why I started my podcast, or a good reason that, like, somebody who pushed me to start my podcast. And my brother as well, like, he was always telling me, like, yo, bro, you got to get a YouTube account. You got to get a YouTube channel and get all this stuff out. You know, that's another way for you to get your message out and a platform you can use. But back to my cousin Davon, like he has a podcast called Socially Introverted. And like the name really caught me, like, because like, if you know anything about my cousin, like he real like soft spoken. He don't really say much. You know, when it's time for him to talk, he say what he got to say. But like, it was dope because I think it was my sophomore year that he started his podcast, either my sophomore year or my junior year. And then I believe his mom, my cousin, or he did it. He posted his podcast on Facebook, and I'm like, oh, my cousin got a podcast. And then the name just like captured me, and still to this day it does. It's like so dope to see that name. It was like Socially Introverted, and I'm like, bro, that's hard. Like, that's pause. That's hard. I ain't gonna lie, that's sweet. But like, I started listening to a couple of his, you know, podcast episodes. I'm like, man, he talking about some good stuff, man. And then, you know, we reached out to each other like we always do. And we got a few episodes in that we did together on my podcast and on his podcast. But he was a real big, you know, motivator for that. Like, you know, like, yeah, I got to go ahead and do this thing, man. And like, just seeing how, like, just knowing my cousin, and then like seeing how like soft spoken he is. And then he was like really dropping gems and dropping facts. It was like, it was dope to see like how he really just took his platform and like is took off. So shout out to my cousin Davon and his podcast, Socially Introverted, and just pushing me for that. But yeah, man, just all I would say again is just find your niche, find your target audience, and then go from there for real, for real. But again, I want to say thank y'all for, you know, supporting the podcast. Again, I can't never thank y'all enough. And, you know, it's always dope to see, you know, it keeps me going for real, for real. Like when y'all hit me up, or like when I see my friends, or, you know, even the older adults, like I got some of the people from my church tuning in to my podcast that's like 50, 60 years old, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, we love your podcast. Or, you know, I listen in, I tell my coworkers. So that's, you know, that's always a blessing. I don't take that for granted. You feel me? So big shout out to y'all, whether you commented on the podcast clip on Instagram or TikTok, or you reposted it, you hit me up, like I always appreciate that, man, and that keeps me going for sure. But as I'm waiting on more questions, man, let me see. But yeah, man, I truly do appreciate y'all for sure. Like, I don't take nothing for granted, and it's just dope. And just kind of stand on that note of, like, when Noah asked me about, like, how do you get a podcast up and running? Another thing I will say is, like, at the end of the day, you got to actually really want to do this, because, like, if you notice, like, podcasts are the wave now. Like, it's a lot of people coming out with podcasts, and even me, I'm shocked. And it's not nobody, I'm not saying, like, it's friends that I know that got podcasts that I'm shocked about, but it's, like, more so, like, entertainers, you feel me, or, like, artists. Like, I never thought that Paul George would have a podcast. I never thought that Trey Young will have a podcast. Like, most people don't even know Trey Young have a podcast, but it's like, that's the wave now. And I'm not saying they got a podcast because they trying to, copy off other people, but I say that to say, I bring up that point when you talk about, how to start a podcast and wanting it. You got to really want this, because it was a time where I did this with my motivational page. Like, when I first created my motivational page, like, it was booming. Like, a lot of people was following me, reposting my stuff, commenting, and then, it died down. Like, people were still liking stuff, reposting stuff, saying I needed that today, or I appreciate when you post reels or posts or whatever. But it was like, for the first time, I got caught up in, like, stuff like views and likes. And one day I was telling my girl, she like, why you ain't put out a video today? I'm like, I ain't gonna lie. It's just like, it ain't hitting the same way like how it was when I first started. But she like, she told me what I always tell people and tell myself, like, you gotta go back to the drawing board and ask yourself, do you really want a motivational page? And why do you want it? So it's like, it's easy to be like, oh, I'm gonna get a podcast, because, everybody ain't consistent. Everybody ain't really committed. Like, they just want to do it just because. And whatever reason you want to do it is fine, because that's your business. But you got to know why you want a podcast. You got to know why you want a microphone and why you want to talk in front of people and say certain stuff. Like, if it don't have no substance, or you don't really know why you doing what you're doing, then you just going to be doing stuff, like, for no reason, for real. So that's another thing I would say about creating your podcast, just, like, understanding the why. You know what I'm saying? I heard an artist say, like, I'm saying all these quotes for real, but, the how is not important, then it's not more important than the why. Like, if you don't know why you want to do something, nothing else matters, for real. So I knew when I created my podcast, I wanted to use my voice as a positive light, because you look at, other podcasts, they disrespecting women, they alpha male this, alpha male that. And don't get me wrong, like, in terms of, like, talking about what a man should be, like, we need that stuff. But, like, when you kind of tune in to certain podcasts, they not really talking about nothing for real, or they using a platform to, like, break down other people. And I knew right away, like, whatever I do, I don't want to use it to break down and tear down somebody else. If anything, I want to spread awareness, and I want to, encourage people and enlighten people of what's going on, whether that's in my life, somebody else's life, or that's going on in the world. So I knew my whys off the bat. Like, I wanted to use my voice as a positive outlet, and I want to use my platform not just for me to be the host, the number one host, but to bring people on and share their stories, or talk about different things that take place in their certain career fields, or how they got to the success that they did, or, how they overcame certain stuff. So for me, I just look at it like, you got to know your why too, because it was a time where it didn't happen for my podcast page, but, like, I bring up the motivational page because, like, I was discouraged for a little while, but then that moment right there pushed me to keep going. And then when I got my podcast, it'll be days, because before I was, blessed to be able to be streaming my podcast and stuff like that, I was going on Instagram, you feel what I'm saying? And, doing my thing on Instagram, hitting people up like, yo, could you be on a podcast with me at 8:45 Eastern Time, 7:45 Central Time? You feel me? And I was doing it on Instagram, and It'll be days where it's like 5 people on the live, and then it'll be other days where it's 100 people on the live. So it's like, I know for a fact, like the type of person that I am, whether it's 5 people that like to post or 500 people that like to post, I'm going to still put out content. I'm going to still share episodes and, different stuff like that. I'm not going to let the fact that, we ain't get as many viewers today, like, just go back to the drawing board. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. Like I heard a content creator say the other day, like, that creating content is hard because you don't have all the answers. You don't know everything about it. Like, you may watch it, and like I study people like Wallow and Gilly because they got a dope podcast and $1 million worth of game. I study these guys that, I take a liking to, or I feel like, have, dope podcasts that's really reaching people. Like my whole thing is like, yeah, I love the views, I love the likes, but what I really love is like that when somebody come up to me and be like, bro, I was listening to your podcast and it helped me throughout the week. Or like, man, I remember when you and such was talking about this topic and it really helped me, and I really had to sit with I like that type of stuff. I want impact, and that's another big reason why I started my podcast. It's another way, another avenue or outlet for me to have impact in somebody's life. Like, I don't want to get on here and be talking crazy. And like, it was times where like, on my motivational page, I really never ran into it on my podcast, but like, I was in my head like, man, if I was on here toting guns, or if I was on here talking about somebody crazy, then a lot of people would tune in. But it don't matter. Like, I don't care if 2 people just tune in or 25 people tune in. I'm still going to get behind this mic and say what I got to say. I'm going to have my guest on because I care more about the impact, and I really know my why for real. Like, I know that I'm not doing this solely for views. That's probably the last thing on the list when it comes to my podcast. Like, yeah, that'll get you known. And I want to have my podcast growing. We got things coming up, but I want to reach somebody. I want to be able to teach somebody something. I want to be able to learn from my guests that I have on my podcast. So, you know what I'm saying? I don't really you gotta know your why, man, because if you don't, you will just be out here doing anything, or you'll just be doing it because somebody else do it. And that's only going to go so far, because when they stop, you going to stop. You know what I mean? So I just feel like that's another big reason on, starting your podcast. Because again, we got a lot of people that have podcasts, and I'm the last person that's going to sit up here and say like, everybody don't have a voice, or like we should cut certain people out because they don't have a voice. You look at, it's different comedians now that's on podcasts. It's, people that I would have never imagined, but I can't say whether it's you doing that because everybody got one, or you doing it because you truly just want to have your own platform and talk your talk. You get what I'm saying? So appreciate you, Kyra. Appreciate you, family. Appreciate you for showing the love. But yeah, and just to kind of piggyback again on my podcast, like, one, again, I want to give a shout out to JG and Audio Wave Network. And to tell you all a story about my podcast, I started off, as those who've been following it know, on Instagram. You know what I'm saying? I was in the dorm with it, making sure it was quiet around my suite, or like, and I will always tell like my guests, because like sometimes you have people that come on there, they in the background, they cooking dinner, they making supper for their kids, like, but it's like, okay, we not doing all that, man. And a lot of times that be a challenge for real, like, and that's another big reason why like I'm the sole host of like my podcast, because I never want to like clash with somebody, and I want to make sure if I do have a host, or if I was to have a host, then like we be in alignment with what the goal is for the podcast. But yeah, I was thugging it out on Instagram, man. At first I started off, humble beginnings on the podcast, with the podcast on Instagram. I get on there every Wednesday unless I was out of town or something came up. I'd be on there from 8:45. It'll start at 8:45, and then it'd probably be like 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes 2 hours, depending on how the conversation flow. But just, man, I'm blessed to be able to, know somebody like JG and the people of Audio Wave Network, because in July, I want to say it was July 20th, or towards the end of July, my boy Denzel, who has a podcast as well, Black Fridays podcast. Shout out to him. And shout out just to him, being a big bro and saying, hey, man, he was like, man, I see what you got going on, because he had spoke at a mentor program that I help out at called Caught Up. And big shout out to Caught Up. We doing all the shout outs today. But he had hit me up like, yo, man, I know you want to kind of get away from being on live on your podcast and, just constantly growing your podcast. And we got a studio down here, and we got an event that's going on in July that I'm going to, keep you posted on. And he hit me up. I got an email a few weeks before the podcast event started. And he was like, man, this is where the event is going to be. I think it's called Bamboo Detroit or something like that. And it was downtown. And I went. He was like, you can either be in the crowd and basically ask questions, or you could be a storyteller. And basically what a storyteller was in that regard was, like, you talk about your podcast and the goals of your podcast, how it started. So I'm like, yeah, man, I want to be able to connect with these people, network in the room and just tell them how I created my podcast. So the day of the event, JG walked in towards the end, and he was like, yo, man, this is for the guy who said he wanted to remove his podcast from Instagram and kind of go on YouTube and be in the studio and stuff like that. He was like, you got a free session on me. And like my first 2 sessions were free. And so I always will appreciate, one, Denzel, for, locking me in with the event. And then 2, just meeting so many people that have different content and podcasts, that I've been working with behind the scenes and stuff like that. And then JG, like, he ain't had to do that. He could have just been like, hey, man, we got a studio, and hey, you can come through. You can book your sessions. He gave me 2 free sessions, and the rest is history, man. God is good, and I'm glad to be in a position that I am in regards to my podcast. So I'll always be grateful for that, and I'll always be thankful for the humble beginnings of the podcast, when my Wi-Fi was janky, but we was still getting the content out. We was editing. I had to edit my episodes, and, sometimes I had to log off and log back on, like all my different guests. It's so many I can't really name, but just all my guests that started with me and that believed in it and was like, yeah, man, I'm gonna set aside time to, come on here, and do an episode with you. And then, like, just hearing how much fun they had afterwards, they'll text me or DM me like, man, that junk was dope. We got to do another one. You feel what I'm saying? So, one, I'll always be thankful for this opportunity that happened in July, to where I'm blessed to be able to be in the studio and, accomplish one of my many goals with my podcast is being in the studio. But also, I'm thankful for the humble beginnings of, like, starting on Instagram and being consistent. Like, man, I got to do this. I got to get this message out. I got to be able to talk to the people and say how I really feel about stuff. So, yeah, man, I'm thankful for Denzel, Audio Wave Network, JG, and just being in a position that I'm in, you feel me, with my podcast. So, again, appreciate y'all for the support and all the love that y'all show for the podcast, man. It's really, we got some big things coming. I ain't going to speak on it just yet, but we working behind the scenes for sure. And I appreciate all y'all support at the end of the day. And this is like a big part of, like, my life for real. Like, I never really envisioned myself having a podcast, but I knew that I would, like, be talking to somebody or using my voice for something positive. So I'm glad I'm able to do that in multiple ways, whether it be my motivational page, whether it be me being at church, being involved in the mentoring program, or getting on here on my podcast. So I really appreciate y'all, and, always thankful for the support for real. And we're going to keep going. The Let's Talk About It podcast is far from done. It's just getting started for real. And I thank y'all for your questions so far, and just wanting to know, how I operate, the different questions y'all have for me. But I don't see any more questions, but I guess I can just continue to talk about the podcast and the ins and outs of it. And yeah, man, like, I just love what I do for real. Like, it's like a calm for real. Like, being on my podcast, talking about the stuff that I talk about, or with other people, like, it's dope, because not only, again, like I said before, like, I don't know everything. I don't pretend to know everything, but it's dope learning from other people and gaining insight that you may have not had they not spoke up or delivered it in a certain way. So yeah, man. Like I'm I'm super blessed to, you know, have this podcast and this platform. And I truly, again believe that, you know, like I know why I do my podcast each and every day. Like each episode, each clip, like it's motivated behind something. Like I'm not just on here just hopping on here just to hop on here. Like I don't do that. Like I want to get on. If I'm gonna get on here and be in front of a mic, be in front of a camera, I'm gonna have something to say that's gonna either inspire or enlighten somebody, or they walk away with something that they may have not known before. Or I don't speak to try to get people to live as I live or do as I do. I just kind of speak from a place of, you know, just kind of seeing where I come from, or like seeing my take on something. And hey, if what I say challenges you, or maybe you disagree with it, I'm fine with either or. You feel what I'm saying? But other than conversation, when it comes to the podcast, it's just like my tagline say, man, we have conversation that turns into application. So, I hope that different topics that we speak on, different topics that I may come across and share with you guys, I hope that at some point that whatever resonated with you, you can apply to your life, and not just apply to your life, but pass it on to somebody else. So yeah, man, like big stuff coming for the podcast. Appreciate y'all questions, man. And as always, man, it's all love. That's a wrap. Appreciate y'all. See y'all same time, same place. Appreciate it.